I'm George Galloway, and I present كلمة on Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing this Nakba day, the 70th anniversary of the catastrophe which overcame the Palestinian people, in which their country was wiped off the map, their people scattered to the four corners of the world. 800,000 Palestinian people were driven beyond the borders of their own country, and those 800,000 have now become 13 or 14 millions scattered everywhere around the globe. The lucky ones living here in London, the unlucky still living in refugee camps in the countries alongside, and some living in refugee camps inside their own country. Just imagine that, a technical impossibility. Technically, you can't be a refugee in your own country, but many Palestinians are, as have their fathers and mothers and their grandmothers and grandfathers. It was indeed a catastrophe by anybody's standards. It was accompanied by massacres, not as notorious as they should be. Massacres inside Palestine and massacres outside Palestine in 1970 and in 1982 and on many, many other occasions. It was accompanied by the physical elimination of whole villages, whole places with a history. It was accompanied by the destruction, not just of people's lives, but literally the fact that they had ever lived there at all. And the Palestinian people are, as I said, scattered. I met one once, a refugee, who told me she came from Haifa in the Arctic Circle in the town of Yellowknife in the very north of Canada, where it was 47 degrees below. She was 7 years old, but as far as she's concerned, she came from Haifa, even though neither she nor her parents had ever seen Haifa. She probably will inherit a key to a house which was once theirs, and which may or may not still stand, but if it stands, it's in the hands of foreigners. It was another example of white European colonialism, just like South Africa, just like Zimbabwe and many other parts of the former empire. Because the people who drove out the Palestinians, the people who stole their land, the people who extinguished their name from the map and hoped that they had been put into the museum of ex-people, were European settlers. That's why I continue to insist that Israel, as they call it, is a European settler state. It's a European settler state just like other European settler states around the globe. That catastrophe that we commemorate today, of course, has become a political issue of the greatest moment. Indeed, the greatest achievement, I believe, of the late President Yasser Arafat was that the Palestinian people refused to go into the museum of ex-people. They kept their name alive. They kept their flag aloft, and even when without legs and sitting on the ground on two stumps and being shot dead by Israelis through the fence on the Gaza border, they continue to hold it aloft. It's oftentimes, and now is one of them, a flag that is seen wrapped around the dead bodies of the martyrs who continue to insist that Palestine exists, that the Palestinians exist. In the last period, we have seen some grave atrocities take place through that fence in Gaza. and it's right that we keep them at the front of our mind. But Gaza is not Palestine. The occupation of Palestine, even the annexation of Jerusalem itself, are also a part of the Palestinian story. The occupation, the building of settlements, the creation of Jews-only roads, imagine, the dispersal of millions and millions of refugees without papers, without status, without citizenship, is all a part of this Palestinian story. So this whole program will be devoted this evening to remembering the Nakba, the catastrophe. Yusuf, from Gaza, an old friend of mine, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, George, each May, Palestinians mark the Nakba Day, which is a very painful occasion. Palestinians remember their towns and villages from where they were expelled back in 1948. The descendants of the refugees who live around the world, they mark this occasion by holding different events, activities. As a descendant of refugee myself, I could not actually visit the town of my grandfather, although I'm well traveled. The issue of the refugees is one of the thorniest. It is the most important core for any peaceful settlement. So without a just solution to the issue of the Palestinian refugees, there will not be any peaceful settlement. Now, any Israeli Jew is allowed to come and live in occupied Palestine, whereas the refugees who live in miserable conditions, they are banned, prohibited from going back.
When you say Israeli Jew, in fact, it's much worse than that. Any Jew in the world has the right to go and live in Palestine and has the right to apply for citizenship in Palestine, even if they came from a very splendid house in New York.
That's right. About 500 towns and villages were wiped off the map, as you said. And at the time, around 800,000 Palestinians were made refugees. Palestinian refugees, I would say, the largest percentage of refugees nowadays. And in order to mark that occasion, Palestinians started preparations from now for the past recently in Gaza, which hosts about two-thirds of Gaza population are descendants of refugees, by the way. That's why you would see the resistance, frustration, anger, despair is dominating the people of Gaza because they are aspiring to go back. And the commemoration events started recently by marching peacefully towards the border fence, and these hundreds or thousands of protesters were met by lethal force. As a Palestinian, I grew up in Gaza, and the border fence separates Palestinians, the Palestinian side, from the rest of occupied Palestine. So they see the fence as a curse, as an insult, and as an insult to them. The old, when they go near the border, they can see their lands, they cannot reach it, and that's why the Israeli side they say, well, it's a small state, so why should we allow Palestinian refugees to come back? That's why there is something going on behind the scenes now, and it's become public, the deal of the century, to get rid of the Palestinian refugees and give them an alternative home in Sinai, in the desert. Palestinians will never relinquish their right of return. It's a sacred right, and the keys of the properties are still in their possession, hoping one day they will return.
Now, this right of return demand has been in recent times abandoned by the Palestinian leadership. It sometimes slips from their lips, but the meaning of the various negotiations which did take place, and even agreements that were reached, which were never, of course, implemented, and there are no negotiations now, how could there be? No one insisted that the Palestinian refugee in Burj al-Barajni in Lebanon can possibly be allowed to return to their home.
But it's a personal right. No one has the right to determine or decide the fate of the refugees. If the president of the Palestinian Authority decided to relinquish his right in Safad, then Palestinians say this is his own problem. You have Palestinians in Lebanon, in Syria and elsewhere, and they aspire for the moment to return back, although they are being hosted by these countries. But and Palestinians say, in light of the demise of the so-called two-state solution, it seems one state is the only option, because then those refugees will be allowed to return back home. Because the Israelis say, even if we allow some of the refugees to return back, they have to go back to the Palestinian areas, which is not going to solve the problem.
Indeed. For what it's worth, I pledged in 1977 to the refugees in Lebanon that I would never stop speaking until they were allowed to return to their home. And no president of the Palestinian National Authority will make me break that vow. Yes, sir?
My name is William Spring. I'm a journalist of sorts. I just want to say that there is hope, because I have to confess that at one time I was as pro-Zionist. Now, the reasons for that are complicated, but I want to explain simply that I came to this position via a nonconformist Christian route. However, I was then convinced, and became convinced after many years, that the American and British evangelicals, those who support Zionism, are wrong on what we call exegetical grounds. When the Holy Land, after the Romans left, the Christians claimed the Holy Land, and it was a Christian area. Then Islam entered, and there was a period of the Crusades. After the Crusaders were defeated, it remained an Islamic area under the Ottomans. Then we get Allenby turning up in Jerusalem in 1917, and the national home being proclaimed. But the point is, the people, the original people of the Holy Land, were the people who were living there at the time after the destruction of the temple. They were mostly Palestinians. And we have got a situation where the Jewish immigrations into the Holy Land, it is a very, as George, you've already said, is a colonial experiment which has unfortunately proven successful up to a point, Mr. Copper, you know? And I believe that the actual colonial experiment of Israel, the creation of the State of Israel, will finally collapse. It is clearly an apartheid state. The prophets of the Old Testament, they had a vision of Judaism where they said the mountain of the Lord will be established above all other mountains, and all nations shall flow into it. But that is a complete antithesis of what we've got today, the apartheid state, where the Israeli forces are allowed to fire on unarmed protesters who are more Jewish in a sense. They've got more attachment to the land than many of the people who've turned up in Israel. So I believe that there will be a change. Years and years ago, I was a youngster, and there was a terrible massacre in South Africa, Sharpeville. I'm sure you remember, you know, some of us may remember,
Very well.
Some of you. That absolutely shocked the nation of England. It shocked everybody. And yet, for weeks and weeks and weeks, there's been a massacre going on down in Gaza and by the occupied territories, which no one has said anything about. Where is the outrage? Where is the concern that there used to be in Britain against unarmed people being killed and massacred in this terrible way?
Thank you, sir. Very powerful. Madam.
Regardless of the present status quo, I'd like to very firmly state that, in my view, Zionism is an epic failure. We've got 13 million Palestinians around the globe to stand testament to that. They used to say that the old will die and the young will forget. What has actually happened is that their old have died and their young are waking up at long, bloody last, with an emphasis on the word bloody.
Well, that's a powerful opening contribution. I'm sure we'll hear more from you later. Yes, sir.
My name's Robert Inlakesh. I'm an independent journalist and activist. I'd like to just add to what's being said that Israel may be coming to an end sooner than we think. I mean, we've got a demographic problem for Israel if you look at it from an Israeli perspective. Now, they cannot sustain themselves as this Jewish-only racist state. They can only sustain themselves for so long, and then it's going to be a demographic problem. So what are they going to do when the demographic of Palestinians grow and grow and grow and grow on them? Also, we now have a strong axis of resistance in Hezbollah and in Syria and Iraq, which has recovered militarily, and Iran, and of course being backed by Russia. And this poses a big threat to the state of Israel in that it cannot just go in and destroy countries like it used to destroy them, because they have fought back and they're now in a very weak position. I think this also correlates to what's been happening lately, of course, with the United States, UK, and France bombing Syria, because they're trying to assert dominance, but it's failing. They cannot do it. And sooner or later, they will lose the demographic, or they will lose because they cannot sustain themselves around the powers that are developing. And they can try, and they can try. And in the end of the day, we can talk about how, you know, Britain needs to condemn more, and the United States needs to condemn more. But really, Britain and the United States, why should we look for them to be the ones to solve the conflict? The Arabs are going to solve the conflict. The Palestinians are going to solve the conflict. And the rest of the world is just going to have to accept it when it happens. And that's my take on that.
Well, let me just ask you a question. What significance do you think is there in all the polling data which shows growing disenchantment amongst young Jewish people in the United States in particular, but also here in Britain? Sense of distancing, in some cases a sense of embarrassment, in some cases a sense of shame about crimes that are being committed in the name of, though I of course reject that, in the name of their faith, their culture, their ethnicity, as they might see it. This is also a part of this ticking bomb, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and because we have this sentiment growing, and of course they can't escape from the reality that's happening. We've got Palestinians, our Palestinian brothers and sisters on the ground with phones that have live streams on them. They can't get away from what's happening. And then when all these images come out and all of this bad PR arises, Jews and anybody doesn't want to associate themselves with that sort of criminality. So this, like you just said, is posing a huge threat to Israel as well, because this is going to, the amount of Jewish people that are going to and are standing against Israel is going to facilitate Palestine coming back onto the map.
Well, let me just give you an example. I resisted watching, for I knew it would upset me, the video of the unarmed civilian demonstrator being shot by a sniper. And I watched it finally in the company of 3 Jewish people, friends of mine, at their insistence. And they had played it before. But when the bit comes where they're all whooping and exulting and laughing and cheering about the sniping down, I don't know dead or not dead, but the shooting down of an unarmed person, I could feel the pain that they felt. Because Jewish people know about pain, don't they? Jewish people have suffered pain, unimaginable pain, a holocaust of pain. And if you're confronted by someone acting in such a way, without any dream of punishment, indeed, Lieberman said that the sniper should receive a commendation. And the videographer should be the one to be punished. Well, that's a measure, I think. It's just one video. I could have chosen 10 million videos, but it's a video that I think will have a profound effect in time to come. Much more of this after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, in London, with a group of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. On this Nakba Day, we're looking back at the catastrophe that overcame the Palestinian people. Yes, madam, in the middle.
Hello, George. My name is Rana, and I want to say that what Robert said is very powerful and true. And we hope that this is the last anniversary of the Nakba, and the coming years will be celebration for the liberation of Palestine. And yes, it's true that Israel in the very critical position, because people from Gaza are moving to liberate it from there, and on the other side, the army from Syria are winning, Hezbollah and Iran, and also supported by Russia. And we never spoke about the people, the Israeli people, who might, a lot of them obviously might have conscience that, and if they see people are suffering, they can turn on their government and say, no, we're not going to accept the killing of innocent people in our name. Like people in UK and the USA are saying same thing, not in my name. So this is going to weaken the Israeli government, the Zionist, because we don't recognize Israel. So what we want to say for the people who are moving from Gaza, that they shouldn't, lose hope. We believe that they are going to be able to liberate Palestine with the support they can get. We want them to keep peaceful, as the demonstration is peaceful. This is their right to return. And we don't want them to be easy prey for the Zionist snipers. So we don't want them to, give any reason for them to kill them. And we want them to move, in a huge number until the 15th of May to come, and more people will be there, and when the huge amount of people in their million will come, they will face a big problem, and Palestine will be liberated. And by then, we have a hope that the crisis in Syria will be finished, because the army is winning, and that's why we saw the bombing of Syria after the fake chemical attack, and we all know that this is fake. White helmets are fake, are terrorists supported by the government, and they are fighting with the terrorists, and they've been revealed.
Well, look, we took the camera, the كلمة camera, onto the streets of London to ask them, the people there, two things: what their attitude was to Israel, and what they thought could be a solution to the ongoing crisis. Let's take a look at what the people said.
Do you think the world, and the Middle Eastern countries especially, should start recognizing Israel as a legal state?
Yes.
No.
I think, everyone's entitled to, I suppose, their home country, and if, Israel is there and they're not going away. But, so I suppose, yes, I think so, yeah.
So what do you think is the best solution for the Israeli and Palestinian conflict?
Have they tried dialogue? I'm not aware if they have or not. I mean, they have they? It's obviously failed then, isn't it? It needs some sort of worldwide outside mediation, round the table thing. So when two parties have gone through mediation, and it hasn't worked out. Something else needs to be tried.
But I feel like a conversation can fix things. I feel like war obviously helps nothing. Too many innocent people die.
Do you think the two-state solution could be a good one?
It could be. It could be.
Probably a two-state solution is the best of what to aim for. Just in my mind, to try to get rid of one completely is just going to put too many people offside. People aren't going to stand for it. So yeah, I think two-state solution would be the go there.
To recognise Palestine as a state, you first of all have to take its leadership away from organisations that cry for the murder of all Jews everywhere. Groups like Hamas do nothing to support Palestinian independence or rights. I believe Palestine is totally should have the right to have a state of their own or to become part of the Israeli state if that is what happens, like whether is the most peaceful way to do it.
Well, a state of confusion amongst the British public, and I'd like to try and steer the discussion now down some of the rabbit holes that were evident in the vox pops on the streets of London. First of all, the question of two states. First of all, Palestine is smaller than a single park in South Africa. The Kruger Park in South Africa is bigger than the entirety of the territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea that we might call Israel and Palestine occupied at this minute. It's very difficult to see how you can make two states out of a park. It's quite difficult to make one state out of a park, but to make two would seem quite a stretch. It's made much more difficult by the fact that since agreement was reached in Oslo on two states, one of the states has paved over a gigantic proportion of the other territory that was supposed to be a state with illegal settlements, military roads, Jews-only roads, and all the paraphernalia of Israeli occupation. Secondly, that two-state solution precludes, by definition, the return of all these refugees that we've been talking about, all these millions of people scattered around the world, because that would mean that the only right of return would be to the small, some 23% of the whole of Palestine, to the 23%, the 13 millions from the Arctic Circle to Brazil have to come back to just 23% of Palestine. But more importantly, there is absolutely no evidence that the ruling elite in what they call Israel has any intention of allowing a meaningful Palestinian state. You, sir, are from Southern Africa. What they have in mind, and always have had in mind, is a Bantustan series of broken up, uncontiguous territories, like the South Africans did with Transkei, Ciskei, Bophuthatswana, and so on. That's what they mean when they say a two-state solution. Anyway, enough from me. Yes, madam.
Yes, my name is Carol and I'm Palestinian. I used to believe one state or two states, but not after I went to the tribunal and watched what happened in Gaza and how, just like you were talking about the shots, how they were shooting people and rejoicing. I watched for a whole week how they went in and how they murdered. I'll be terrified if the Palestinians are right now at the mercy of the Israelis in any state. And I believe we have to find protection for Palestinian children for anything to change. You cannot change the mentality of the Israelis who've been, hyped up to kill all these years. But how are you going to put them together? I watched how they went. We don't want to go into what actually happened, but I don't believe Palestinians will be safe
in a one state
from the Israelis in any state. And I was in Palestine only just before Christmas, And so I want to tell Yusuf, I did go to my family home where my family were kicked out of from Jaffa. It is heartbreaking. I felt very, very sick because it's such an unresolved issue. It's also felt like if a Jewish person went to Auschwitz, it's where it brought a lot of suffering. My grandparents and my parents who were kicked out of Palestine never had any closure. And I felt, how can we still be in this state? I felt so sad.
And when you say protection, protection by whom? And if not a state, what?
No, I believe in one state, equal rights, absolutely equal rights and protection for everybody. But you have had generation after generation after generation of Israelis above the law. And I watched it where they went into a bunker and they asked who speak Hebrew, and they shot the ones who speak Hebrew because for whatever reason. They will never accept that we Palestinians are equal to the Israelis. And how you're gonna...
So who are you asking to protect them?
Whoever put them in there, because these people were not put by themselves. They were put in by the UN. And it's time the UN put some protection and took some control, because just watch the tribunal. It's out there. It's horrific, and it's very, very detailed.
Don't hold your breath waiting for the UN to solve this.
So,
the lady here in the middle. Go ahead, madam.
Can I just say one thing about the Christian Zionists? I'm Christian. I have no idea how the Christians support oppressive, because we were the very first kicked out, and Christ was from Palestine. I was encouraged a few weeks ago when Hamas said we protect the mosques and churches. For once, somebody said we protect the churches, because it's definitely not the Zionists.
The Christian Zionists want to bring us to Armageddon just as quickly as possible.
Yes, but they're destroying churches, and here is somebody offering to protect the churches.
Well, Syria protects the Christians, the Christian faiths, the Christian holy places, and these Christian soldiers of the United States and Britain are bombing Syria on behalf of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and something that calls itself the Army of Islam. Go figure. Yes, madam.
Hi, my name's Tyra Ahmed, and I'm a human rights activist as well as a life coach. I think the point that I really want to make is the cause of the problem, and also why is Israel allowed to get away with this with impunity? How come none of the nations, none of the leaders are speaking out against the genocide over 70 years, and in particular in the last few weeks, the absolute cold-blooded, atrocious killings that have been going on. Why is this happening? What's this power? What's this hold that Israel has? And also the fact that there's people that feel that, they feel guilty that they can't talk against Israel because they're going to be accused of being anti-Semitic and because of the Holocaust. So these are the things that we need to discuss. So the thing that connects not just Palestinians and what's happening in Syria and maybe the Middle East, but what connects what's happening in Palestine and the whole of the Middle East with the whole world is actually Rothschilds and the Balfour Declaration, which was the centenary last year. It was called the Balfour Declaration, but it was addressed to Lord Rothschild. And we gave, or Britain gave, this third-party country, away, one British lord to another British Jewish lord, a country belonging to a third people who weren't consulted or anything, gave it away from one people to another people, and that in itself is illegitimate. It doesn't go by any due process that we have. Why are we accepting an illegitimate state? So once that's been done by a piece of paper, then it was born in blood with the Ergon gang committing the most atrocious terrorist acts, with the bombing of the Hotel David, King David Hotel, and nobody talks about these things. You know, we're attacking Syria at the moment on some false notion that Assad committed some sort of gas attack. And we're going in and we're bombing this country, and yet we accept a country that was born from a bloody terrorist attack, that was forged in genocide and ethnic cleansing, that was passed from one lord to another lord without consultation of those people. Why are we talking about the symptoms here? Why are we not discussing the cause, the very nature and the existence of this state, which is totally illegitimate? We should be calling for the dismantling of this illegitimate state, just like South Africa. And I don't believe the power structure there has been dismantled, but to a certain extent, the power was passed from the racist genocide. Well, they weren't really genocidal the way that Israel is, but the racist apartheid state of South Africa was passed on to the black people. Why are we not calling for the dismantling of this state? It's an illegitimate state. And what connects us, the whole, all people from all worlds, with this state is the fact that we are also enslaved by Rothschilds through the banking system. The whole system. Why
does Rothschild own the banking system?
Well, Rothschild owns. Yes, he does. He owns. A huge.
No, he doesn't. So I'm going to stop you. No, he doesn't.
Right. Well,
no, he doesn't. Rothschild is actually a relatively small banker. The vast majority of banks are owned by ordinary capitalists with shares. And
we don't know. We don't know who the shares are.
I know.
Reserve. It's
I know, and they're not Rothschild.
It's secret, so we don't know for sure.
No, it's not secret. It's not secret. You can consult Companies House and find out who owns the banks. It tells you who owns the banks. Well, they're in black and white.
The Federal Reserve.
You've just gone down a rabbit hole, and that's why I had to intervene on you. 3 times you mentioned Rothschild. The first time was entirely legitimate because the letter was sent to him.
Right, so okay.
But I am not a slave of Rothschild.
Okay.
Neither are you.
I'm going to accept what you say and stick with the fact that the letter that was given from Balfour to Rothschild, he's the one that actually has a ownership over Israel. No. He's the one that is.
It's the man that sent the letter you should be concentrating on, and he sent the letter on behalf of.
We can concentrate on both. Why do we have to concentrate one or the other?
Because I'm arguing. You can hold whatever view you like, of course. It's Kلمة after all. I'm arguing that this was a British imperialist crime.
In conjunction with...
No, the person he sent the letter to had no power at all. He was being given the Palestinian land, or rather promised it even before we had it.
He wasn't given the land just because he asked for it. He held a huge amount of power. The Zionist movement holds a huge amount of power.
He didn't hold a huge amount of power, and neither did the Zionist movement in 1917. The vast majority of Jews in 1917 were anti-Zionist. They were leftists, socialists, communists.
The vast majority may have been.
Lord Rothschild had no more power than Jeffrey Archer. Lord Jeffrey Archer. Now, you are in danger of disappearing down a rabbit hole that is damaging to the Palestinian people. Don't you understand? You are down a rabbit hole which turns people against the Palestinian people. Because you sound like you're obsessed by Lord Rothschild. Much more after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television. Now, we took the camera onto the streets of London. Our first encounter didn't show much in the way of enlightenment. Let's see if our second one did.
Do you think Britain and the West in general has operated fairly between the Israelis and Palestinians?
I think that anybody who gets involved in any conflict between two countries and the involvement does not result in peace means that the involvement isn't positive. Like, I feel as though if you're getting involved for the sake of helping people and the war is still going on for 10, 15 years, however long it's going on for, it means that you're not adding any positive to it. I don't know what is the special interest in Palestine and Israel that these people have, but I don't think it's about the people of Israel or Palestine.
I don't think the British news is something, because it's such an ongoing conflict, I don't think we've ever had news it's never the headlines anymore, because it's one of those tragic tales that is just a constant, that I don't think we as British public would necessarily know what's been going on unless we sought that information specifically.
In recent history, Britain's involvement hasn't been that great, as far as I know. I know they don't give much money towards Israel, not like the United States.
John Bolton, Trump's security advisor, has said that there should be no Palestinian state. What do you think of that?
Not American, don't know John Bolton, couldn't comment. I don't know. I think that's quite a strong thing to say.
That's interesting, but I'd say it would be hypocritical to say that about Israel, not about Palestine, the Palestinians.
What do you think of John Bolton's suggestion that there should be no Palestinian state?
I'd say rubbish. Palestinians were there first. How can you create a state, something, and plonk it there and that's it, and the other people have got to go? That's ridiculous. Anywhere, regardless of the Middle East or whatever.
Well, I don't know about you. I'm quite proud of the Mohican. The man with the mohawk haircut had plenty underneath. Doctor, you're next.
Hi, Dr. Tomasz Pierścionek, junior doctor and part-time freelance journalist. While the rest of the world has been focused on Syria, specifically about condemning Assad for liberating Duma and kicking out the Islamists from there, they've ignored the massacre that occurred on Land Day. Now, Land Day, which occurs every year on 30th of March, is when the Palestinians march up to the border fence in Gaza and they protest for the loss of their land. It's been going on since 1976, when six Arab Israelis, I believe it was 6 Arab Israelis, came to basically came to request their homes back.
In Al-Fahim.
And they were shot. So Palestinians have been doing that ever since. Now, on this occasion, this year, the Palestinians marched in tens of thousands, unarmed, up to the border fence, and 18 of them were shot. George, the video you referenced earlier, you can hear the Israeli sniper shouting "Yesh," which in Hebrew means "got him," which is quite shocking. But what's more shocking is a lot of these Israeli soldiers are 18. They're 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They're conscripts. So you kind of think, if an 18-year-old can do that, then what must their upbringing have been like? What kind of side must they be immersed in? It reminds me of the case of Elor Azaria. About 2 years ago, he had I think he was a sergeant, aged about 20 in the Israeli army. He's part of the medical corps, actually, and he shot a wounded Palestinian in the head. There'd been two Palestinians tried to attack an Israeli army post. They were wounded, no threat at all. And Elor Azaria, you can see on the video, he's hanging around, walking around for about 10 minutes on the scene, and he suddenly walks up to one of the Palestinians and shoots him in the head. He got 18 months in prison. 18 months in prison, eruption of rank, 12 months probation. 18 months in prison for basically cold-blooded murder. That tells you quite a lot.
Just by the way, 18-year-old British soldiers were shooting Irish people until a few years ago, in our own country at least, as presently constituted. And the 18-year-old British soldiers weren't doing it because they were British. And the 18-year-old Israeli soldier wasn't doing it because he was Israeli, still less that he was Jewish. Both did it because they were occupiers, because that's how occupiers behave. And they are ready to shoot and kill because they believe the other is somehow subhuman, or to use the Yiddish, Untermensch, less than a human. And this is further evidence for my case that this is not just another colonial enterprise. It's people who think they are superior to the people they have displaced, subjugated, occupied, and therefore they can be killed like wild animals. Ahmed.
Hi, my name is Ahmed Kabela. I'm a journalist. I think the point you made about the occupier is very important, because what occupation does it destroys people in their land, but it destroys the soul and the inside of the person that's doing the occupation. And Israelis, after they do their military service, a lot of them try to travel around Latin America, and what they struggle when they go out and travel is how the rest of the world sees them. People in Argentina, people in other parts of Latin America, they don't want Israelis staying there because what they see on the television. And in the long run, this is only going to exacerbate as time goes on, as the occupation goes on, as the footage that we see goes on. So I want to make a comparison to South Africa. The last president, de Klerk, of apartheid regime, he wasn't a good man, he wasn't a moral man, but he was a sane man, and he was realistic. He realized the jig was up, and he understood that unless we go to some sort of negotiation at this moment in time, it's going to be a bloodbath, and it's going to be our blood that's going to be running through the streets. So my suggestion to the Israelis, to their leadership, the jig is up. There's more Palestinians in what they call Israel today than there are Israelis. The movement and support in Western countries, in places like Belgium, the UK, is overwhelmingly in support of Palestine. So this is the time to really, not peace process where you're just dragging it on and pretending, really sit down and give the Palestinians what they deserve, allow the refugees to return, and allow for the Palestinians to have justice now. Otherwise, they'll take it, and they'll take it in ways in which won't be too pretty.
Of course, I share that analysis, but this is why Rabin and Peres negotiated the Oslo Agreement, because they were effectively playing the role of de Klerk and making a deal with Arafat, who was a highly flexible leader. The problem is they didn't implement what they signed. What they signed wasn't good enough anyway, but they didn't implement it, and now it's impossible to implement it. So how is this new de Klerk or new Rabin going to arise? From where, and what credibility would they have if they did?
Well, the first recognition is that the system needs to be dismantled. In South Africa, they didn't suggest that the apartheid system would continue. That's the first part of the negotiation. These Jewish-only roads in Hebron have to end. The settlement projects have to be dismantled, and the Palestinians have to come back home. And at the end of that, what you get is what everyone in the audience and you've advocated for, and that's one state solution in which the people within that land find some sort of peace amongst themselves, and there's a democratic election, and in a democratic election, when the Palestinians return home, it will be a Palestinian leadership, and they'll slowly start to turn back some of the historic and damaging events that have taken place.
Well, just to buttress that, at the end of apartheid, a section of the Boer population asked Mandela if they could have the Orange Free State as a white state. And Mandela answered, "We don't believe in black states or white states. We believe in democratic states." That's why the demand, for me, with all respect to any supporters of the Palestinian National Authority here, the banner that needs to be raised is a single democratic state. Not a Muslim state, a Christian state, or a Jewish state, but a single democratic state where the religious rights of everyone living in it are protected. From the river to the sea, and it'll still be smaller than a park in South Africa. What do you say?
I agree, and there's just one more point I want to make. The Israeli Labour Party has cut ties with Jeremy Corbyn, which is the greatest news I've heard all week. I don't know if anyone else.
Like being divorced by the Bride of Frankenstein.
And the thing that's worrying about the Israeli Labour Party is people suggest it's some sort of progressive entity within Israel that the Palestinians can do peace with. Now, what we've got in Israel on both sides is something that's so far away from de Klerk. And I don't know what it's going to take for the Israelis to understand. They'll never have security. They'll never have a state of peace when even as they travel as Israeli citizens around the world or within their so-called state. While they oppress Palestinians, while they keep them in gated prison that they call Gaza, while they stop pregnant women from going to hospitals and stop them at checkpoints. This isn't sustainable, and the 70 years of history has shown it's not sustainable. So, for the sake of what they call Israelis and Israel, let's end this now.
Mind you, they could always steal other people's passports and pretend to be Irish, British, and whatever else it does. No, someone who hasn't spoken yet, the gentleman in the middle.
Yes, my name is Joshua from Battersea, not too far away from here anyway. Just to touch on what you were saying about the sustainability of Israel, I think one of the reasons why it has, possibly one of the reasons it survived so long, this is speculation, not unreasonable speculation, is because of all the attempts that the Western governments have done to divide much of the Middle East, as we saw in the Iran-Iraq war, and the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, and quite recently in Syria, again, I think, this is where the threat to Zionism actually comes from as well, in much the same guise. It's that Jews are, as we've been discussing earlier, not by any means united when it comes to Israel. The founder of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl, was actually condemned by the Orthodox Jewish community for anticipating
he was an atheist, in fact.
Yes, well, how hypocritical. Can
I interrupt you for a second? Because I'll come back to you, of course. The reason why it can definitively be said to be a colonialist project is that Herzl, and including Rothschild, were negotiating with the British Empire for any piece of land, anywhere. Uganda, Patagonia, the Seychelles. They were ready to build what they call Israel anywhere. It was only later they invented an ex post facto biblical connection, atheists with a biblical connection. As I always say, the early Zionists didn't believe in God, but they believed God promised them Palestine. Go ahead.
Yes, no, indeed. Well, I didn't even know that, actually. But yes, basically the division is, I think, the greatest threat to Zionism is going to come from within the dividedness of the Jewish community itself. And a lot of people have recently been discussing videos that were posted on social media. Well, I saw one of an American Jew who was only peacefully, just one on himself, as far as I could see, as far as I could tell, just by himself on his own. He was protesting about the Israeli occupation, well, the illegal Zionist occupation of Palestine, and he was definitely trying to advertise the fact that he was Jewish because he was wearing a skull cap. He was very, you could tell he definitely wasn't Palestinian. Anyway, he was manhandled by security in the most brutal way you could imagine.
I've seen that video.
Yeah.
Very brave. Daniel in the lion's den. He was.
No, brave man. But I think what that highlights, what that demonstrates, is the Israelis are very eager, in fact, more so eager than for any other party, to suppress the voices of their own fellow adherents of their own faith. And that...
Well, a very good point. You mentioned earlier the onslaught against the British Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, on fake accusations of anti-Semitism against him. One of the astounding things, and I've reached an age where not that much astounds me anymore, is the thousands of Jewish people in Britain that came out in support of Corbyn. People I have never heard of, never known them, never seen them on a demonstration, never been conscious of their existence as a political factor. Thousands of them. The last figure I saw, something like 9,000-10,000 had signed their names, all Jewish names. We support Jeremy Corbyn. We say this anti-Semitism charge is a lie. Hallelujah. We're coming back right after this. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, in London, talking about Palestine on this somber day, the day of the Nakba. This is the last segment, so let's press on. Yes, the lady there, yes.
سامية الحسيني مدرسة وناشطة عالمية. أحب أن أعود إلى الموضوع الأساس وهو النكبة. عندما نتحدث عن النكبة نظن أنها نكبة وانتهت. نحن نحيي ذكراها الآن 70. نقول الذكرى 70 للنكبة الفلسطينية. لو كانت انتهت لكنا نستطيع أن نحيي هذه الذكرى، ولكن نحن نرى الأحداث التي تتوالى يوما بعد يوم، وكيف أن الفلسطينيين يتعرضون كل يوم لنكبة تلو أخرى، النكبة تلو النكبة، من اغتصاب أراضيهم، من تدمير منازلهم، من اغتصاب نسائهم، من أقل حقوقهم، من كل شيء يراه العالم والكل صامت يتفرج. والنكبة الكبرى هي تخاذل الدول العربية والموقف الذي اتخذته تلك الدول، وخاصة على رأسها السعودية. كانوا بالقبل يقولون أنه لا بأس من أن نعيش بسلام وأن نشاركهم المكان والزمان، ولكن الآن لا يستحون أن يصرحوا بحقهم في الاستيطان. فإذا عدنا إلى عام 1948 كانت نسبة الاستيطان 10%، ثم توالت لتصبح 20%، 30%، 40% و50%، حتى الآن يعني نسبة الاستيطان عالية جدا، وما زالوا يتوسعون والعالم كله فقط يتفرج. هذه كلها نكبات، كلها نكسات للشعب الفلسطيني. فإذا أردنا أن نحيي ماذا نحيي؟ ليست نكبة واحدة، إنها نكبات متتالية. كمان أيضا أريد أن أضيف أن هذا يعني الشعب الفلسطيني كان يعول على بعض الدول العربية، ولكن للأسف هذه الدول خذلته وغدروا به كأخوة يوسف. لم يعد له معين، فنراه يقاوم بكل أشكال المقاومة، يقاوم بالجسد الحي، يقاوم بالسكين، يقاوم بالسلاح، يقاوم بأي طريقة كان. حتى الأطفال تقاوم، حتى النساء. وكلنا نرى ما فعلته عهد التميمي، أو إذا اتخذنا مثالا باسل العرجان أعتقد اسمه الأعرج، باسل الأعرج لم يكن هو مقاوما، بل كان دكتور وصيدلي، ولم يقبل بالاستيطان ولا بالاحتلال، فحمل بندقيته وقاتل وجاهد ليسترد حقه في الأرض حتى استشهد. لأن الشعب الفلسطيني أيقن وأنه لا مجال للنصر إلا بالاتكال على الله سبحانه وتعالى وعلى أنفسهم. لا بد أن ينتصروا في نهاية المطاف ويستعيدون أرضهم بإذن الله تعالى.
Ahad Tamimi is worth 10,000 men. This lady here, please.
Thank you first for mentioning my cousin's daughter, Tamimi. Thank you.
I didn't know.
Thank you for letting me be on George Galloway Convoy in 2009. I don't know.
Remember, you're from that, yeah?
I looked for my family for 10 years. I want to talk about right to return. I couldn't find them at all. It was only through a picture of me in Al Arish that someone put together with a picture of Ad.
We'll never forget Al Arish.
We'll never forget, but it's taken me 10 years. I found them. I went 3 years ago. As I left, you know, they attacked Ad's little brother, and it's been going on really heavy since then. They've even been questioned where I've gone. Right to return, very hard to do. I checked for records, I checked for my family. There was no records. I asked, can I go and look at graves? There are no graves, they've been bombed. There are no records, there was no way. This was the only way. Luckily for me, I looked like my grandfather this way, my grandmother this way, so the whole village recognised me, and photos of my mum, and my nan had the same name as many women in the village. Right to return, yes, if we win the right to return, what records are left? How do we fight? My mother had senile dementia. She didn't have the family name Tamimi. I had to go and look for a family that I had no surname. That was really hard. I mean, yes, right to return. I have a key. I have a key from my mother's mother's mother. Even I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do with someone who's born in England, whose grandparents came from Palestine, as to where they lived, anything. It's records are destroyed. You know, I'm
well,
just,
of course, but that doesn't invalidate the,
the right.
overarching case, which is absolute, by the way. I'll use a word that I learned in the 1970s. Yusuf said the same thing, but didn't use the same word. It is an inalienable right. What does inalienable mean? It means a right that nobody else can give away on your behalf. So it is, in legal terms, an inalienable right of all Palestinians to return to their land. You may recall Tony Blair standing amongst the Kosovan refugees.
Oh, yes.
It's in one of my films. And Blair says, fair play to him, that no matter how long these refugees stay here, no one can take away their right to return to their homes. Well, if that was true for Kosovans, why is it not true for Palestinians? Last word to you.
My last word is I'm going back in 1 month. My mother has left me money to pay to take anyone who wants to come to my village, Nabasali, with me. I will bring you there. You can meet Jenna and the family and be treated like you're in a 5-star hotel.
Well, I would love to, but they'd probably put me under arrest.
And hopefully not me. This man was sent out of Palestine as well for being there too long. I seem to be all right at the moment, and I'm willing to
Unfortunately, I'm banned by Arab countries, not by
I know.
Israel.
I went with you in 2009. I saw what happened. And I just want to thank you.
It's a
for
very, very
taking
nice
us.
offer, though. And
anybody, I will take people. I will pay. Because we need to get more attention on our villages, very small.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you.
Okay. We're coming now towards the end. I want to hear from our experts. Let's start with the expert right here in the middle.
Just want to, Sandra Watfa, I didn't say my name at the beginning. I just want to correct one thing, one expression that really irks me. There is no such thing as an Arab Israeli. He or she is a Palestinian under Israeli control. You jigged my memory about the Kruger Park. Tavo Herzl, who was the then ambassador in South Africa, kept whining about, well, Israel is smaller than the Kruger Park. And Ahmed Kassim, I don't know if you've know, the amazing freedom fighter, said, our position, even if Israel was the size of a postage stamp, it has no right to exist. And from my point of view, it absolutely has no right to exist on my expense, on anybody else's expense. That's all.
Thank you. Let's hear from Yusuf.
Yes, well, everybody knows that we are the indigenous people of Palestine, the owners of the land, and we are proud of our history, our culture, our identity, despite their attempts to forge history, claiming that this kind of thing belongs to them. Even the hummus, we don't have any.
This is happening. I've been in 2 restaurants in London in the last week, which turned out, I mean, I knew there were Jewish restaurants, but they turned out to be selling themselves as Israeli restaurants. And on the menu were all of your dishes being sold as theirs. Yeah? You can have shakshuka and Israeli salad.
Wow.
You can have Israeli hummus, Israeli falafel.
Shawarma. Yeah, shawarma.
Yeah.
And also the camel is Israel's national animal. Yeah. So yeah, the embroideries,
the Israeli kafir,
even the songs, even I mean, so Palestinians will never give up the right of return. It's a sacred right, the inalienable rights. I mean, as Sandra said, Palestinian generation after generation, we teach the love of our homeland to our children. The old will die, the young will never forget.
That's very well put. And this, I suspect, is the sword of Damocles hanging over the Zionist project, because it depends on either everybody being killed or everybody dying or everybody forgetting. Well, even Israel can't kill everybody. And Palestinians, mashallah, make a lot of children. And so if you can't kill them all and none of them are forgetting, you've got a demographic problem. Rana.
I just want to say also about the Jewish. You're saying that a lot of the people who are supporting Jeremy Corbyn are Jewish. Also, these Jewish are with the dismantle of Palestine, Neturei Karta and Judas.
Yes,
And
the
that's
original
why,
anti-Zionist
that's why they
Jews.
call
Yeah.
them anti-Semitic. They're not anti-Semitic, and that's why.
You know,
anyone who
we have reached the height of absurdity when an ultra-observant Orthodox Jew wearing a hat with long hair, carrying around a suitcase of kosher food just in case anything not kosher crosses their lips by accident, and you're calling them anti-Semites.
Yeah.
We really have reached the Alice in Wonderland situation, don't we?
Yeah, and it will be dismantled. No matter how, it will be dismantled. And we really respect these people. And a lot of the people in the Arab world don't know much about them. And we stand with them.
I want to close on that. And Ahmed, maybe you can deal with it. When I became involved in this cause in 1975, all of the Arabs supported the Palestinian cause. And virtually none, I could show you my scars, virtually none of the Westerners supported this cause. Now, the vast majority of Westerners support the cause, but where are the Arabs? You're an Arab, tell me.
African and Arab. But my father tells me about the stories of universities in Sudan organizing for Palestine, and Sudanese willing to give their life to fight for the liberation of Palestine. Now we've got a problem, a disease in the Middle East, where we have Takfiri militants who are being treated in Israeli hospitals, fighting against other Muslims. And when you mention Palestine, they say, we'll pray for Palestine, Palestine will pray for Palestine. Why will you only pray for Palestine, but you're willing to give your life to fight against other Muslims? That's the question that I've got to hopefully your viewers that are watching in the Middle East. I wanted to ask you a question, George, because you've got a lot of experience in this area. Now, as far as I understand it, Israel will only exist while it's supported by the United States and its junior partners, United Kingdom, etc., France. There's an argument that the United States' dependency on the Middle East will go once the oil leaves the region. Can you envision a period in time where the United States doesn't provide Israel with £1 billion of aid? In fact, whatever happens in Israel, it tells them that's your own business. We've no longer got a dog in this fight. Now, as somebody that's followed this for a long period of time, can you see that day coming?
I do see it coming. I think it's already happening. Many in the very captaincy of the United States state machine already know that they would put it this way, over-invested in Israel, a small country on the Mediterranean of not much more than 5 million people. And they, first of all, have a much bigger ball game. Saudi Arabia is much more important to them than what they call Israel. But in any case, as you say, America's real interests lie to its west, into Asia, to what we call the Far East and so on. And their dependence on Israel as an auxiliary, as a military outpost, is bound to diminish over time. Taken together with really mass movement of public opinion amongst American Jews, in which the younger the Jewish person in the United States, statistically far more likely to be hostile to Israel than to be supportive of it. So I think the United States is falling out of love with Israel, will fall out of love with it, and that would threaten the European standard of living that Israelis enjoy. Trust me, most Israelis are not religious in the slightest. They're there because it's a nice place. It's got sunshine, beaches, sea, and you can live a European standard of living. But you can only do that as long as the United States subsidizes you and as long as the European states treat you as one of theirs. When these things begin to fall, I believe most not all, but most Israelis, will take off back to the countries from which their parents or their grandparents came. If you want to have your say, it's your say at kalimahorra.com. I've been George Galloway. You've been a marvellous audience, and I hope everyone enjoyed the show.